When we are young, we are taught that movement is everything. The world around us urges speed, success, growth, hustle, faster is better, louder is stronger, busier is more important. We race to accomplish, to accumulate, to prove we are enough. Life becomes a never-ending sprint, from achievement to recognition, from pleasing others to escaping our own discomfort. But somewhere along the way, often after heartbreak, loss, or simply the passing of time, we begin to wonder, what if the answers we seek aren't in the chase, but in the pause? In the later years of life, that wondering becomes knowing. Stillness, once mistaken for laziness or stagnation, reveals itself to be one of the most powerful forces on earth. In stillness, everything false falls away. In stillness, you meet yourself. Not your roles, not your title, not your identity in someone else's story, but your true eternal self. Quiet and steady beneath the noise of the world. And with that peace comes a deeper kind of joy, one that doesn't depend on circumstances, praise, or approval. It's the joy of sitting by yourself and liking who you are, of walking through the day slowly, not to arrive somewhere, but just to feel the air on your skin, of knowing that the only thing you must protect is the stillness inside you that says, I am whole even when the world is loud. This kind of peace is not loud. Taking your time to get used to the ways you live within you. This kind of peace is not loud. This kind of peace is not loud. Come to the table with the kindness. Come to the table with the kindness. It's not about the day. It's about living inside of the kindness that already is. Come to the table. It doesn't need to announce itself. It simply radiates. It becomes a force field around you, one that repels chaos, welcomes clarity, and lets only love in. And the most beautiful part, once you've tasted this peace, you will never again trade it for noise. You also begin to safeguard your space, not just physically, but emotionally. You surround yourself with softness, people who speak gently, who listen more than they judge, who let you be. You recognize how rare such souls are, and you honor them. You prune your life like a wise gardener, removing what no longer blooms so something quieter, stronger, and truer can grow. You no longer apologize for your boundaries. You no longer fear disappointing others. You stop explaining why you need rest, why you didn't answer the phone, why you said no. You simply honor your needs. Because finally, you believe they matter. You know now that peace is not found in doing everything for everyone. It's found in knowing when to say, this is enough. Where once you might have attended every gathering out of obligation, now you stay home and find joy in silence, in slowness, in simplicity. You trade noise for nourishment, books instead of small talk, nature instead of confrontation, prayers instead of complaints. And in that shift, you start to thrive in your own rhythm, not the frantic pace of the world around you. You stop engaging with gossip, with petty disagreements, with emotional tug-of-war dynamics. You learn to smile and not respond. You let others be right if that keeps them happy, because now peace matters more than victory. You realize that your soul was not made to carry the weight of endless opinions or to perform for people who still haven't learned to love themselves. As the years pass, something shifts deep within. The loud urgency of proving, pleasing, and performing softens. Life slows, but your clarity sharpens. You begin to see with unmistakable simplicity what was always true but often ignored. Your peace is sacred, and protecting it is not selfishness, it is wisdom. You reach an age where the drama that once pulled you in now repels you. You no longer have the desire to argue in circles, chase closure from those who never offered sincerity, or explain your heart to people committed to misunderstanding you. You finally realize not everything deserves a reaction, and not everyone deserves access to your energy. Peace becomes your compass, not attention, not validation, not applause. You no longer enter every door that opens. You ask, does this disturb my peace? If the answer is yes, you walk away without guilt, without explanation. That's the quiet power that only time can teach. You don't owe anyone the disturbance of your inner stillness. With emotional detachment, your inner world grows quieter, more stable. You carry fewer burdens that don't belong to you. You breathe deeper because you're no longer suffocating under the weight of needing to manage everyone else's emotions. And this freedom gives you room to feel the things that truly matter: gratitude, joy, reverence, love that flows without demand. Emotional detachment, then, is not the end of caring. It is the beginning of caring wisely. It is a shift from reaction to reflection, from exhaustion to presence. You begin to live not to prove, but simply to be. And that in itself becomes the most powerful way to exist. We start to respond more slowly, with more pause. We learn the art of letting people misunderstand us. We become okay with not explaining ourselves. We no longer waste time trying to defend our intentions to people committed to misunderstanding them. Our detachment isn't coldness, it's self-respect. We've learned the value of preserving our emotional resources, and we no longer spend them recklessly. And with that comes something else: peace. Not the kind that comes from everything going well, but the kind that comes from knowing you'll be okay, even when it doesn't. You become rooted in yourself. You no longer seek approval to feel worthy. You no longer fear distance, rejection, or silence. You've walked through enough fires to know your soul can't be singed by someone else's opinion. Emotional detachment also frees us from personalizing everything. We no longer interpret every silence as rejection, every disagreement as betrayal, every distance as a reflection of our worth. We realize that most people act from their own wounds, beliefs, and fears, none of which are truly about us. And so, instead of reacting, we observe. Instead of chasing validation, we return to our own center. This detachment also transforms our relationships. We stop trying to control how people see us, stop trying to fix them, stop trying to rescue those who don't want to be saved. We begin to allow people to be who they are, without trying to mold them into who we think they should be. And in doing so, we gift them the space to grow. Or not. But we are no longer responsible for their evolution. Only our own. In youth, our emotional landscapes are volatile. We feel everything deeply, immediately, and we believe we must respond to everything with equal intensity. Someone insults us, we defend ourselves. Someone misunderstands us, we chase clarification. Someone withdraws, we panic. We pour ourselves out in endless effort, attempting to secure love, maintain harmony, or prove our goodness. But as we age, we begin to see that most things work themselves out, or fade, without our interference. We begin to see that most things work themselves out, or fade, without our interference. We begin to see that most things work themselves out, or fade without our we learn that silence often carries more power than rebuttals. That walking away is not weakness, but wisdom. That detachment is not indifference, but clarity. Clarity about where to spend our precious energy and where not to. There comes a point in life, not suddenly, but gradually, where the emotional storms that once consumed us lose their grip. The conflicts that once pulled us in like undertows, the need to argue our perspective, the urgency to correct, defend, explain, all of it begins to feel heavy, unnecessary, even absurd. We start to realize that peace is far more valuable than being right. And so, quietly, almost imperceptibly, we begin to detach. But this detachment is not apathy. It is not bitterness. It is not the hardened silence of someone who no longer cares. Rather, it is the measured stillness of someone who has learned that not every battle is worth the energy, that not every conversation is worth continuing, that not every person deserves emotional access to your inner life. This kind of detachment is not a wall, it is a boundary, lovingly and consciously placed. Yet staying in that light reveals something essential. We are whole precisely because of those scars, not in spite of them. With each moment of self-acceptance, solitude shifts from adversary to ally, offering a mirror that reflects not deficiency, but resilience. The transition from loneliness to solitude also recalibrates our relationships. When we learn to stand content in our own presence, we approach others without the hunger to have our voids filled. We come to them not as beggars of attention, but as givers of genuine presence. Paradoxically, this self-sufficiency deepens bonds. Friendships rooted in freedom, not need, allow both parties to breathe. Ultimately, solitude becomes a sanctuary where the mind can settle, the spirit can listen, and the heart can expand. It reveals that our deepest companionship is, and always has been, the quiet wisdom within. What felt like an empty room is in fact a vast inner landscape, waiting to be explored with patience and gentle wonder. Solitude also sharpens perception. Without external chatter, senses awaken. The flavor of tea becomes nuanced. The cadence of rainfall gains texture. The everyday breeze feels like a benediction. Such heightened perception stitches us back into the fabric of existence, reminding us that we are participants in the grand unfolding, not spectators left behind. When the universe becomes your companion, physical companions, though still precious, are no longer the sole antidote to emptiness. In solitude, we meet ourselves as we truly are, unarmored by social roles. We notice the beliefs we've outgrown, the judgments that never belonged to us, the neglected dreams trembling for attention. This meeting can be uncomfortable at first, like stepping into a room lit by stark morning sun. Flaws and scars stand out, but avoidance only widens the hollow. When we acknowledge loneliness, when we allow ourselves to feel its raw edges, we open a door to understanding what the heart is truly missing. Not necessarily people, but connection. Connection to purpose, to beauty, to memory, to the vast interior world waiting behind every breath. Once the ache is seen, we can start to repurpose the quiet as fertile ground. Solitude invites curiosity. What forgotten passions can find room here? Perhaps the paintbrush retired decades ago longs for another canvas. The diary hidden in a drawer craves fresh ink. The garden plots deserve one more season of care. These activities do more than occupy time. They weave meaning back into the hours, proving that a day spent alone can still be bursting with life. There is a subtle but profound difference between being alone and being lonely, and that distinction often sharpens with age. Loneliness is an ache, a sense of absence that gnaws at the edges of the heart. Solitude, on the other hand, is presence, an intimate meeting with oneself that can feel as rich as any crowded celebration. Yet society rarely teaches us how to cross the bridge from loneliness to solitude. Instead, it warns us that quiet rooms are perilous, that empty calendars signal failure, that we must keep company to keep relevance. In truth, the opposite can be equally powerful. Learning to inhabit our own company can turn the echoing chambers of old age into halls of profound discovery. Transforming loneliness begins, paradoxically, with admitting its sting. It is tempting to drown the discomfort in distractions, television murmurs, social media scrolls, polite gatherings where conversation hovers safely on the weather, not from fear of rejection, but from fullness of heart. And when you no longer strive to please everyone, you begin to attract the ones who love you for who you are, not for how well you perform. That is the beauty of this stage of life. You don't need to explain why your peace matters. You don't need to exhaust yourself trying to keep the peace outside while you're crumbling inside. You learn that the only real peace is the kind you carry within, and that peace is sacred. You weren't born to be everyone's solution. You weren't put here to be convenient. You were born to live in truth, to grow in wisdom, and to rest in the quiet knowledge that you are enough as you are, not as others need you to be. You stop fearing disapproval. Instead, you return to yourself. You begin to ask, what brings me peace? What feels right in my bones? What honors my truth even if it doesn't please the room? And what you discover is that authenticity is more fulfilling than approval. You may lose people, yes. You may be misunderstood. You may even be called selfish. But what you gain is far greater. Inner alignment, self-respect, quiet joy. When your actions reflect your truth, rather than someone else's preference, you become whole again. You walk through the world not needing applause, but simply existing in integrity. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you care without bending. You love without losing yourself. You support others without abandoning your own needs. You become the kind of person who chooses kindness from strength. You smile when you're hurting, all to maintain harmony in rooms that don't honor your truth. And little by little, the weight of that self-betrayal becomes unbearable. In old age, we begin to see through the performance. We begin to count the cost of always pleasing, the friendships that felt one-sided, the family dynamics that drained us, the opportunities missed because we were too afraid to upset someone. We realized that no matter how kind, generous, or accommodating we were, someone always found fault anyway. That's the nature of expectations. They multiply and shift like sand. And no matter how well you mold yourself to fit one person's desires, someone else will always see you as lacking. There comes a time when you simply step out of that cycle, not in anger, but in clarity. You stop twisting yourself to make others comfortable. You stop chasing affection. One of the most liberating truths that emerges in the later seasons of life is this: you were never meant to please everyone. It takes years, sometimes decades, to shed the illusion that our purpose is to satisfy expectations, smooth over discomfort, be agreeable, be accommodating, be perfect. For most of our lives, we're conditioned to serve the comfort of others. As children, we're rewarded for obedience. As adults, we're applauded for being cooperative, flexible, self-sacrificing. But eventually, the soul begins to whisper something different. Your peace matters too. Trying to please everyone is a silent thief. It steals your identity, one polite compromise at a time. You begin to speak less of what you believe and more of what you think others want to hear. You say yes when you mean no. You show up when you're tired. Silence ultimately becomes an act of trust. We trust that conversation can pause without relationships crumbling, that problems can breathe without immediate solving, that our worth persists without self-promotion. In this trust, we grow humble, and humility is fertile ground for wisdom. It says, there are truths larger than my perspective, forces kinder than my striving, mysteries richer than my explanations. From such soil, compassion sprouts, first toward ourselves, then effortlessly toward others. And so, in the deepening hush of later life, silence is not a retreat, but a return to inner guidance, to cosmic rhythm, to the boundless grace that underwrites every fleeting sound of human life. We sense that the universe functions without our commentary, that seasons change, tides shift, and dawn arrives whether or not we announce it. In recognizing this, the ego loosens its grip, and we feel ourselves part of a vast order rather than isolated performers on a personal stage. Then there is the communion with the unseen. Call it prayer, meditation, or simply presence. Silence is the doorway through which the finite meets the infinite. Words, no matter how eloquent, create boundaries. Silence dissolves them. In that borderless expanse, we encounter a grace unconditioned by achievement. It asks nothing of us, speaks in no human language, yet assures us we are cherished beyond measure. To taste this grace even once is to understand why mystics retreat to deserts and poets cherish dawn. It is less escape than arrival. Intuition does not shout. It flickers like candlelight, illuminating the next small step rather than the entire path. It is in silence that its glow becomes visible. Beyond intuition lies memory, yet memory transformed. In noise, memories are merely stories we retell. In silence, they become teachers, showing patterns and lessons we missed when we lived them. Moments once dismissed or misunderstood reveal their purpose, like constellations connecting once scattered stars. Regrets soften into wisdom, and past kindnesses, both given and received, echo back as blessings, affirming that grace has accompanied us all along. Silence also tunes our ears to nature's counsel, the low rustle of leaves, the unhurried roll of distant thunder, the deliberate rhythm of our own heartbeat. These reminders draw us into harmony with cycles older than civilization. Silence is often mistaken for emptiness, yet it is anything but hollow. It is the quiet chamber where life's most profound melodies resound. In youth, we race to fill every gap with noise. Conversations, music, arguments, opinions. Believing fullness comes from sound. But with the slow unfurling of years, we discover that the grandest spaces, like cathedrals in night skies, are defined as much by what isn't there as by what is. Silence is the cathedral of the soul, an architecture built not from stone, but from breathless stillness. And within that sacred architecture, wisdom waits, patient and unhurried. When we finally sit without speaking, the first voice we hear is often the loudest, the restless chatter of the mind. But if we resist the impulse to break the stillness, the mind's bustle subsides and subtler voices emerge. We begin to hear the soft hum of intuition, the ancient, wordless knowledge that preceded every textbook and teacher. And so in our seasoned years, we give ourselves permission to release the invisible chains of explanation and applause. We speak when the soul nudges us to speak, and we fall gracefully silent when words would merely seek affirmation. We no longer clutch at approval like a lifeline because we have discovered a deeper anchor within, the simple, unshakable fact of our own existence, sufficient and entire. Most of all, letting go safeguards our integrity. When the need to be understood dominates, we are tempted to revise our truth, to shrink or stretch it until it fits the mindset of the listener. But when we stop negotiating for validation, the truth can stand upright and unaltered, even if it stands alone. This steadiness radiates a quiet power. Some will sense it and draw nearer. Others will misunderstand and drift away. Both outcomes are acceptable because neither alters who we are. To walk this path requires courage at first, a willingness to feel the uncomfortable silence that follows when we decline to defend our choices one more time. Soon, however, that silence turns from hollow to holy. It becomes a sanctuary where the heart can rest, knowing it has nothing left to prove and nothing left to hide. Here we find a peace that no compliment can inflate and no criticism can puncture. Nor is it our job to collect praise like trophies on a shelf. Praise is as transient as weather, sunny when we please the crowd, stormy when we fail their expectations. Age teaches us that tethering self-worth to such changeable skies leaves us forever exposed. When we detach our value from applause, we step indoors to a place where calm prevails regardless of the forecast, where our worth is measured by inner alignment rather than outer applause. Releasing the hunger for praise also returns time. Time once spent rehearsing arguments, perfecting masks, and replaying conversations to see where we might have won more approval. That reclaimed time can be invested in softer pursuits, tending the small garden outside the kitchen window, rereading novels that once shaped our imagination, rocking a grandchild without hurrying the moment. These are riches no audience can grant or revoke. There is a quiet freedom that visits us in later life, a freedom that whispers, you no longer have to explain yourself. For decades, we chase comprehension and applause, tailoring our story so that colleagues, friends, and even strangers will nod with approval. Yet one day, often without warning, we awake to realize that perfect understanding from others is neither achievable nor necessary. In that moment, we begin a different journey, the sacred art of letting go. Letting go of the need to be understood is not cynicism, it is clarity. We recognize at last that every listener filters our words through their own hopes, fears, histories, and biases. No matter how carefully we craft our sentences, their interpretation is always colored by experiences we cannot control. Trying to micromanage that process is like trying to calm the wind with our hands, exhausting, fruitless, and beneath the dignity of a soul that has earned its gray hair. In this stage of life, focusing on yourself becomes your right. You've earned it, not just through age, but through endurance. Through everything you've survived, through all the times you put others first while quietly falling apart. Now, it's your time. your space, your soul. And when you honor it, when you protect your mind and spirit as sacred ground, you discover something extraordinary. You don't need the world's validation to feel full. You need only to return to yourself, fully and without shame. And in that focus, your dignity returns. The kind of dignity that comes from honoring your limits, from refusing to be drawn into other people's chaos, from living a life that no longer depends on being everything for everyone, but on being true to yourself. This focus, this turning inward, also makes room for things you may have once abandoned. Creativity, curiosity, faith, self-discovery. You might find that as you focus on yourself, you return to painting, to gardening, to reading, to writing letters you never send. You might even find a kind of quiet joy that you had forgotten existed. The joy of simply being, of waking up with no pressure, no guilt, no performance. You no longer feel the need to explain your silence or justify your distance. You no longer feel guilty for choosing solitude over company or stillness over stimulation. You begin to understand that your value doesn't come from being available to everyone. Your value comes from how whole you feel when you are alone, from how safe you feel in your own presence, from how you treat yourself when no one is watching. Focusing on yourself doesn't mean cutting people off harshly. It means choosing wisely. It means listening to your body when it's tired, rather than pushing it to attend one more gathering. It means saying no without apology. It means allowing yourself to rest, not just physically, but emotionally. From all the roles you've played, the burdens you've carried, the identities you've upheld for others' comfort. Old age is when we finally stop and ask, at what cost? And it is in this sacred moment of reflection that we begin to see the need to focus inward, not as an act of selfishness, but as an act of survival, as an act of healing, as an act of preservation. Because the truth is, not everyone deserves a piece of you. Not everyone should have access to your mind, your heart, or your presence. Not every family member who calls themselves close actually respects your peace. Not every friend who laughs with you would weep for you. And not every conversation is worth having if it leaves you feeling small, confused, or exhausted. In old age, your energy becomes your currency. And unlike in youth, you can't afford to spend it recklessly. When you focus on yourself, your wellness, your peace, your comfort, you create boundaries that protect your mental health. As we grow older, something subtle but profound begins to happen. We start to reclaim pieces of ourselves that were once scattered across the needs, demands, and opinions of others. We start to remember the version of ourselves that existed before the world told us who to be. And with that remembering comes a shift. A powerful realization that the most important relationship we'll ever have is the one we have with ourselves. In youth and even in middle age, we're conditioned to give and give our time, our attention, our emotions, our sacrifices. We are taught that love is about giving, that family is about endurance, that loyalty is about selflessness. But somewhere along the line, often quietly and without warning, that endless giving begins to cost us something. Our joy, our identity, our health, our dignity. There is a kind of silence that screams strength. It is not the silence of defeat. It is the silence of someone who knows who they are and who doesn't need to prove it. Someone who walks away not because they're afraid, but because they're free. When you reach a certain age, you no longer need to react. You no longer need to be right. You no longer crave validation. You begin to understand that silence is a response to sometimes the most powerful one. And when you start living in that kind of silence, you stop living for others' noise. You begin living for yourself. Silence teaches us patience. It teaches us observation. When you stop talking, you start seeing. You start understanding people not by what they say, but by what they don't say. You begin to read the room, the body language, the energy behind words. You begin to understand the unspoken. This is the realm of the wise, not the loud. Silence is also where healing happens. Words can open wounds, but silence gives them time to close. In your quiet moments, you begin to reflect, not react. You begin to process emotions deeply, not defensively. You become a calmer version of yourself, not because the world changed, but because you no longer give it the power to pull you in. And sometimes silence is an act of love. Not every truth needs to be spoken to be known. Not every wrong needs to be corrected, to be resolved. Sometimes silence says, I value this relationship more than this argument. Or even, I trust time to reveal what I cannot. In youth, we are taught to speak up, to assert ourselves, to make our voices heard. And yes, there is value in that. There is courage in self-expression. But with age, we learn that there is also courage in restraint. There is great wisdom in not responding to every insult, every foolish opinion, every emotional trigger. There is maturity in choosing not to engage. You don't lose anything by staying silent, but you protect a great deal. You protect your dignity. You protect your energy. You protect your peace. Because once you open the door to certain conversations, you invite in confusion, tension, sometimes even damage. And for what? To win an argument? To prove a point? What good is a victory if it costs you your calm? There comes a time in life when you no longer wish to argue, to correct, to justify, or even to respond. That time often arrives with age, when the noise of the world no longer excites you, and the battles that once seemed worth fighting now feel like distractions. Silence, which once felt awkward and empty, suddenly becomes your greatest companion. It becomes a warm, comforting room you can enter any time you no longer wish to be pulled into the chaos of others. Many misunderstand silence. They think it's weakness. They assume it's the sign of someone who has no words left or someone who has surrendered. But those who truly understand life, those who have seen its cycles, suffered its losses, and felt the weight of words that cannot be taken back, know that silence is a form of power. Not the kind of power that demands attention, but the kind that protects your spirit from unnecessary harm. And when you finally stop caring about how you're seen and start focusing on how you feel, you open the door to a life that is no longer performative, but authentic. A life where you can drink tea slowly. A life where you can sit in the sun without guilt. A life where you no longer need to be right to feel whole. That is the peace we earn with age. That is the treasure found in letting go of opinions and focusing instead on your own gentle, quiet center. We live in a time when opinions are louder than truth, where people speak before they listen, criticize before they understand. And if we keep bending ourselves to meet every comment, every critique, we will break. Especially in old age, when our time becomes more precious and our energy more limited, We cannot afford to waste our days chasing approval. We cannot spend our final seasons trying to convince others of our worth. We must reserve that space for peace. Peace doesn't come from being liked. It comes from liking who you are when no one is watching. It comes from knowing you've lived, learned, and let go. It comes from waking up and not feeling anxious about how you're perceived, but feeling grateful simply to be alive, to breathe, to exist in your own skin. Aging has a way of stripping away the unnecessary layers of performance. It softens the need to please. It invites us to quiet our minds and notice what truly brings us calm. Not excitement, not attention, but real, steady, undisturbed peace. Inner peace becomes more than just a nice idea. It becomes a necessity, not just for emotional well-being, but for survival. In old age, your world naturally becomes smaller. You no longer have the same circles, the same roles, the same responsibilities that once consumed your time and energy. The outer world shrinks, but the inner world expands if you allow it. In that expansion, you begin to realize that the most valuable thing you own is not your house, not your bank account, not your legacy, but your peace of mind, that quiet center inside you that doesn't shift with judgment, that isn't disturbed by gossip, that remains whole, even when others misunderstand you. In the early chapters of our lives, we often find ourselves caught in the whirlwind of opinions. From childhood, we are conditioned to seek approval from our parents, from teachers, from peers, from society. We measure our worth by how much applause we receive, how many compliments we gather, how often we are told we're doing the right thing. But as we grow older, as life humbles us through its trials and revelations, we begin to see the hollowness in such validation. We begin to ask ourselves, who decides what is right for me? Who defines my peace?